Hi, everybody. This is Leanne Huang at Chapin Hall. We are excited to have you all here on this call today, on the webinar. I shouldn't call it a call. So we want to welcome all the fellows that are on. I know some people are still joining. I wanted to let everyone know that we're going to keep you all on mute. During this, there's a lot of information that we want to share, so we want to make sure there are no distractions with background noise. So as the presentation continues, just type any questions that you have into the questions box, and we will all make sure that, that those get answered. So we are very excited to have some folks with us today from NCSL, the National Conference of State Legislators. We think that there's a lot of potential actually for information sharing and for collaboration between the fellows, NCSL, and the states that you all are living and working in. The state level is sometimes ignored when people think about policy, but it is really, it's actually where most people think most of the work is really done. So we're hoping that to give you some more information about the possibilities in your state for making a difference. So we have 3 NCSL staff members with us today. I'm just going to introduce briefly the first person who's going to speak, and then they will introduce themselves as we go along. As always, if you have any technical difficulties during this, you can send me an email or a text. You all should have my contact information. So I will now turn it over to Nina Williams-Mbang from NCSL. She's a program director in child welfare. So go ahead, Nina.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. And again, I'll just provide a brief overview of what NCSL is. Next slide. We are a nonprofit bipartisan organization. All legislators and legislative staff in all 50 states and the territories are members of NCSL. And you can see here we've listed our 3 main missions, basically improving the quality and effectiveness of state legislatures. One of the ways that we do this is through our state services division that's here in our Denver office that works with legislators and legislative staff on the institution itself. We also have an office in Washington, D.C. that lobbies Congress on behalf of states. And here in Denver, our State Policy and Research Division includes the major policy areas of health, education, energy, environment, transportation, criminal justice, and the program that I work in, which is the Children and Families Program. And we provide research and technical assistance support in all of these areas. Next slide. And here you can see some of the things that we do. We provide research for state legislators and legislative staff. We do have a website, which you all are welcome to access and see the materials that we have in some of the areas that we cover. Congressional meetings, invitational meetings. Invitational meetings are meetings in which we invite state legislators and legislative staff to attend, and we hold a series of workshops on particular topics. We respond to information requests via email or telephone from legislators, basically asking us what do other states do in these particular areas, what kind of legislation is out there, what are best practice in a number of areas, what research shows. We do have a monthly magazine, State Legislatures magazine, which goes to every legislator in the country. We do a variety of trainings and testimony at state capitals. We attend hearings and present information. We have 2 national meetings. One is our legislative summit that is held in the summertime, and we have a meeting in the smaller meeting in the fall. But again, those consist of educational workshops, meetings, chances for legislators to interact among each other, and chances for them to work on policy issues. And we do have I think, an expanding and growing social media presence. And we've included here a graphic that shows some of the impact that NCSL has based on our meetings and publications and state testimony and social media. Next slide. And I will tell you a little bit about the program that we're in. We basically, in the Children and Families program, cover everything that would concern a legislator in the human services arena. These include child support, child welfare, early care and education, welfare and poverty, and we also cover family law and domestic violence. The Child Support Project works on, provides a clearinghouse of information about child support laws, and we're currently working on a publication of how to communicate with state legislators on these topics. The Child Welfare Project covers a wide variety of topics: adoption, kinship care, foster care, workforce development issues. One of the major efforts that we're involved in right now is a collaborative project called the Three Branch Institute, and we collaborate with the National Governors Association, the National Center for State Courts, the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and Casey Family Programs. And the most recent institute focused on improving child safety and preventing child fatalities. That was a 2-year project. We had 2 national convenings, and we worked with 8 state teams of legislators, judicial representatives, and executive branch representatives to help the state develop state safety plans. And at each of those meetings and through the technical assistance, we provided a variety of research related to child fatality to those legislators and other members of the team. So just trying to give you an idea of some of the things that we do that may provide an opportunity for us to collaborate. Our Early Care and Education Project, which you'll hear a bit more about later on in the webinar, looks at child care, workforce, home visiting, and other issues affecting children ages 0 to 3. Their work includes an Early Learning Fellows program, again, which you'll hear a bit more about. That program just hosted its 7th cohort of legislators in Denver recently. And we also held our first annual Infant and Toddler Symposium here in Denver in May. Finally, another meeting that we hold is a Human Services Chairs meeting, and where we gather Human Services chairs and Appropriation Committee chairs for a 2-day workshop on a variety of issues affecting legislators in those areas. The other areas in our Children and Families program, as I mentioned earlier, are welfare and poverty, and again, our Human Services Chairs meeting, as you can see. Next slide. We do a variety of publications related to the topic areas that we cover, and these are available for public consumption. They are on our website. We do newsletters, monthly or quarterly newsletters. There's a child support newsletter, child welfare, and there's also an early care and education newsletter. These are all quarterly, and they present information on NCSL reports, and also national resources, any research that we find, and things, other things of interest to state lawmakers. Also available on our website are a number of databases, legislative tracking databases. The child support and the early care and education projects track 50 state pending and introduced and enacted legislation. Excuse me. And the Child Welfare Project tracks enacted legislation. Again, these are resources that are available to the public on our website. One of our other resources is the Early Care and Education 50 State Financing Data Survey. That is also available on our website, and we've put I hope that you can see our website, our URL. Before I turn this over to Megan McCann, I'd like us to do a quick chat box poll. I just have one question for you. How many state legislators do you think there are in the United States? How many state legislators do you think there are in the U.S.? And if you could just type that into the chat box.
There are not 0. So.
Take a wild guess.
Maybe.
Well, I'll go ahead and turn this over to Megan McCann.
All right. Well, surprise. There are more than 0, and there are less than 8,000. So if we can go to the next slide. There are 7,383 state legislators and about 25,000 legislative staff. And as Nita mentioned, they are all members of NCSL by virtue of being part of the legislature. So we serve and work with all of them. In addition, I was going to do another poll, but I think we'll just kind of move forward. There are 99 legislative chambers. So you might ask yourself why there are 99 if there are 2 chambers in each of the 50 states. And that is because of Nebraska. Nebraska is a unicameral state, meaning they only have 1 chamber. They do not have 2, so there are 99 chambers. I'll kind of go over a little bit about who state legislators are and their perspectives on the issues that we're so entrenched in, and kind of the ways that they absorb the information that we put out. So when thinking about how best to present research to this group, it's important to keep a few things in mind. There is a difference between citizen and professional legislatures. Those are kind of the terms that get used in the industry. So the majority of state legislatures are citizen legislatures, meaning that they are part-time legislators. For instance, Wyoming only meets 30 days once a year, while New York, which is sometimes considered a professional legislature, meets year-round. And so other states only meet every other year. Texas, Nevada, Montana, North Dakota are the 4 that meet every other year. So when thinking about how to disseminate information, it's important to know when your legislature meets and what that means. Some states do a budget session every other year, and then the alternate year is their policy session. So knowing what those sessions look like is important to how they're going to be able to absorb the type of information that you'd like to get to them. Second, legislators are considered generalists. While they may have an be interested in diving deep into 1 or 2 issues, they need to know a little bit about every issue that they are voting on from A to Z. So they may not know a lot about a little, or they may know a lot about a little, but they have to know a little about a lot. So understanding that perspective and how you are sharing information and what that information looks like, given the wide breadth of information that they have. In addition to that, I sort of have up on the slide here how many bills legislators are looking at. So again, with the Wyoming to New York comparison, Wyoming introduces about 500 pieces of legislation in a year, while New York will introduce about 16,000 pieces of information. So just in kind of knowing that, you can sort of see that these legislatures very much vary in how much they're having to look at and the amount of time that they're there. So we looked at the last year, I think this is from 2015, the number of legislators or the number of bills that are introduced versus enacted. So in 2016, there were 150,000 introduced bills in all 50 states and about 30,000 enactments. So really, state legislatures are where the action is happening. That's where all of the movement is coming from. So they are an incredibly important group of people to get to know and to communicate with. Legislators are problem solvers and firefighters. They have to address the most pressing issues happening in their state and be responsive to their constituents. And they're normal people. They have other jobs, especially in the citizen legislatures where they're only meeting 30 days a year. Not all legislators are professional politicians or lawyers. They're teachers, pastors, ranchers, farmers, parents, and grandparents. And they don't all come from a highly academic or legal background. So knowing this context when talking to them is important, that they might not all be coming from the same background as you would assume. In addition to being the problem solvers, as you can tell with 30,000 enactments, they are the term laboratories of democracy. They're the test cases. So many pieces of federal legislation have come out from a state legislative example. And so they're incredibly important. So we can go to the next slide. So just taking a look at partisan composition, another really important aspect of communicating with legislators is sort of knowing where they're coming from. And so this is the partisan composition following the 2016 election. So this is our current partisan composition across the country. You can see Nebraska is white. It is nonpartisan in addition to being unicameral. So they do not go red or blue ever. So in the 2016 election, nearly 6,000 legislative seats were up for election. So this led to some significant turnover. On average, there's around 20% of all legislators are new each election. So this turnover creates a big learning gap and learning curve for new legislators who not only have to learn the rules and procedure of the chamber that they're in and the legislature that they're in, but also all of these topics, again, A to Z. And I think this is a great opportunity for researchers. Researchers are a great resource to bridge that gap and provide some important context and information to new legislators, and knowing how to communicate that information is critical. We can go to the next slide. So what do legislators focus on and care about most? I'd say first and foremost is solving problems, using data and research, learning from others and what others are doing, and responding to constituent concerns. Legislators, I'll kind of focus on the data and research piece, because that probably applies to most of us on the webinar. Legislators want to know what works and what is efficient. While evidence-based information is great, given the timely and immediate needs of constituents, legislators are also very interested in evidence-informed research that can help guide their decisions. So it doesn't always have to be peer-reviewed or verified or all of those fancy research terms for legislators to want to know about it and to help them inform their decisions. Return on investment and cost-benefit analysis is huge for legislators. Legislatures hold the purse strings in every state. They are the ones making the budget. So knowing where the cost-benefit analysis is coming from, where the return on investment is coming from is important. Several states have looked at or used a performance-based budgeting process or an evaluation of the cost-benefit of the programs its funds. We have some examples if you're interested, but I think this is another opportunity where researchers are so entrenched in the data and the statistics and the information that's out there that this is an area of interest for state legislatures. Knowing what they are funding and whether it is producing the intended results is very important. And again, I think that's another area where the research can come in. We can go to the next slide. So knowing all of this about state legislators, what do we do about it, and what's the best way to communicate with legislators? Well, legislators love data and research. They also need to know the why. Why is this information important, and what can they do about it? As I mentioned, constituent concerns are a top priority for state legislatures. So they have very human reasons for doing the things that they're doing and for making the decisions that they're making. So knowing the why and why it's important and how it will impact their constituencies is really important. Being able to provide information about how much a program will cost and what funding streams are available to pay is extremely important. Finding a legislative role is important. While legislatures hold the purse strings, finding another program for them to fund is not always the best option or only legislative option. Legislators are great conveners and information sharers as well, among other strengths that the legislators can do and roles that they can take. Keeping this in mind, a few ways to communicate research to policy for state legislators is a few things to keep in mind. Methodology and how the research was gathered is not always necessary when communicating with state policymakers. They need to know bottom line. What are the results? They need to make quick decisions and don't always have the time to wait for validation of research. Sometimes just communicating general or initial findings is all that is needed. Following up with the final product is always appreciated though. Short, to-the-point resources are helpful. A one-page front and back brief on the issue is helpful. Bullet points are important. If they're interested in diving deeper on the issues, again, they do have very specialized issues in a lot of cases. Providing that option is great. If they can have a quick, this is know before you go information, that's important. And that, kind of lastly, don't forget legislative staff. Legislative staff are invaluable to the process and when possible are able to do the deeper dive into various issues. They're often the consumers of most of our material and are the ones asking us the research questions. So with nearly 8,000 legislators and 25,000 legislative staff, remembering that 25,000 number is important when communicating your research. So that's sort of the general about how to communicate with legislators, and we can answer some questions later. But I'm going to kick it over to Julie Poppy to talk a little bit about our Early Learning Fellows program, which is one of our best opportunities to really bring the research to legislators in an area where that's been done very successfully. So Julie.
Thanks, Megan. As Megan mentioned, my name is Julie Poppy, and I'm Program Manager with the Early Care and Education Project here at NCSL. So thanks for letting me talk to you today about the Early Learning Fellows program. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the program, who the fellows are, what topics the fellows have learned about, and what some of the fellows are doing now with that information. So the program began in 2011, and since the inception, we've had a total of 6 cohorts participate in the program. So we'll start our 7th cohort in 2018. The program includes 2 face-to-face meetings and 2 webinars, and there's continual contact with NCSL staff and experts in the field. This is a peer learning environment for our participants. And if you want more information about the Fellows Program, we provided a website on the slides, but it's ncsl.org/fellows, and the current program is 6. Next year, it'll say Fellows 7. This program is for NCSL members, so state legislators of human services, education, or appropriations committees can participate, and those who are experienced in or interested in learning more about early childhood and early learning issues. And this program is for legislative staff too. So we have a competitive application process, and I'll briefly describe some of the components of that process. So step 1, usually around the beginning of the new year, NCSL sends out an Early Learning Fellows program description and nomination form to the legislative leadership offices in the states. So this would be the Speaker of the House, and for most states, the Senate President. These leaders nominate up to 3 legislators that they believe would benefit from and add to the Early Learning Fellows program. So then these nominees that we get from the leaders, we send them out a Fellows application, which includes the explanation of the Fellows program and a section with questions for the applicants. So those are gathered. NCSL staff carefully read through all submitted applications, and we score them. And our fellows are selected based on their application responses, with attention given to regional and party participation. NCSL typically receives more applications than we're able to accept in the Fellows program. So our cohort sizes have usually run between 25 to 36 participants, and we've had between 17 to 26 states participating. So at the meetings, we cover many topics, such as brain science, childcare, return on investment that Megan mentioned, pre-K, school readiness, transition, and data, to name a few. I'm going to go back to the brain science. We like to ground everyone in the brain science to start off with our Fellows program. We think it helps us provide a frame when talking about policy issues, and also helps with translating the science of early childhood and research into policy. So I mentioned we had 2 meetings. Our first meeting is a kickoff meeting, and it's framed around building state leadership. And then our second meeting usually provides the fellows with more of the policy and the research and the innovations in early childhood. And our funders for the Fellows program are the Alliance for Early Success, Buffett Early Childhood Fund, and Heising Simons Foundation. Next slide. So now I want to tell you more about our fellows. So we've had participation from 47 states and 2 territories. We haven't had a fellow yet from Alaska, North Dakota, and Virginia, but we're going to try our hardest this next year. We've approximately 180 legislators and staff have participated. And currently right now in our alumni network, we have approximately 140 NCSL members. So these are the legislators and staff who participate in the program throughout the states and territories. And we continue to engage with them. The political makeup is always bipartisan with Republicans and Democrats, and nonpartisan members, and partisan and nonpartisan legislative staff. Next slide, please. So I just provided some quotes from some of our fellows who participated in the program, and I have to just to briefly describe, Senator Deb Holt was in our second cohort, and she really enjoyed working with political friends from across the country. The program provided rich information, and she truly appreciated the contact with NCSL and experts to deepen her knowledge. Senator Kate Sullivan from Nebraska was part of our third cohort, and she found it to be a rewarding experience in many ways. She loved networking and hearing about the research and cutting-edge information on early learning. She thought it was a great action-oriented program. We had Representative Susan Montine with part of our fourth cohort, and she learned, again, cutting-edge research about the brain science, policy, pushes the envelope, and she was able to apply what she learned with proposing a bill in the 2016 legislative session on preschool suspension and expulsion. Thanks. Next slide. So that just gives you a sense of the feedback we've received from our folks. So we continue to explore ideas with these fellows after they've left our programs. These folks have proposed legislation on home visiting, quality rating systems, pre-K expansion, child care subsidy, to name a few, pre-K expulsion. But then they've also done things as in meeting with stakeholders and other legislative colleagues to just talk more about early learning and the early childhood issues. And they've also discussed how to create a children's caucus in their state to sort of educate their members or their colleagues. The fellows continue to participate with NCSL too after being part of the fellows. So they attend and present at other invitational meetings and webinars sponsored by NCSL. They've become part of a working group at NCSL, the State Policy and Research for Early Education. So we've engaged with them in that way. They've requested additional information, and they have requested information on data and research for potential legislation in the future, just to name some of the work that's going on now. So that's a little bit about the Early Learning Fellows program, and I'm going to kick it back over to Megan.
Thanks, Julie. So I'll just kind of wrap it up, and then we can take some questions. So be sure to put those into the question box because we're happy to answer any and all questions. I think just to sort of wrap everything up, from NCSL is very interested, and certainly our members are interested and can benefit from this research to policy type collaboration that we're seeking in this webinar, and just generally the opportunities to work with you to get your research in front of legislators or help you figure out the best ways to do that. So we have, I think there was a picture of it in the child support program. We'll be putting out a how to talk to state legislators guide for child support professionals, and that will provide a lot of the same information that you've heard in the webinar with sort of some topic-specific information for child support professionals. Our newsletters are always opportunities for us to disseminate information, research quarterly to our members, and then all of our meetings, including our Early Learning Fellows, which is our premier program here at NCSL, around bringing that research to legislators and seeing all the incredible work that they've been able to do with that information. And so with that, I will kind of move it to questions. I think there's one question that we can answer here. So here's our contact information. Feel free to reach out to, so Nina, Megan, and Julie are all on here. Feel free to reach out to any of us, and we can certainly assist you with any questions, and we would love to be able to collaborate moving forward. And so it looks like there was one question. Someone asked, does the number of bills, 500 to 16,000 that were introduced in Wyoming and New York, include only bills, or is that amendments as well? That is only legislation. It's only bills. So it doesn't include all of the amendments that might be attached to those bills as well. I will note in New York and with some other states, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, they introduce companion bills in each chamber. So it sort of does duplicate the number of bills that get introduced when they introduce the exact same bill in both chambers. That's sometimes protocol. It's sometimes the easiest way to get it through the legislature is to have the buy-in from both chambers. So that can inflate that number a little bit. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, actually, hey, this is Leanne. Julie, Nina, and Megan, first of all, thank you. This has been really informative. One question that we've had is really going back to the question about communicating with state legislators. I can't say that word, legislators, I guess. So, you know, if a fellow is, you know, working in a state, let's say they're in, well, any state, Kentucky, for example, and they are working on a particular, like their research is around adolescents aging out of the foster care system, for example. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about, is it your recommendation that researchers, you know, proactively reach out to state legislators in their state and try to develop a relationship? Is it better, you know, to wait until something's in the news or something's being considered in the state and then try to reach out to them? If you can just talk a little bit more about that, sort of crafting these relationships or not in order to share your research findings from something that might be relevant to the state.
Sure, I'll start. This is Nina, and then Megan and Julie can jump in. I would definitely recommend that they try and be really proactive about reaching out to legislators. And I think that includes not just looking through the news, but certainly that as well to see what kind of legislation or what's going on at the Capitol, but also go onto the website and see how the legislation works, identify the relevant committees related to your research, see when they're holding meetings on a particular topic or on a variety of topics. And those, you know, hearings are often open to the public for testimony. You can contact staff, you can contact the chair of the committee saying you have information that might be valuable on this particular topic. And definitely be attuned to, you know, the bills that are being introduced, the issues that the committees are will be looking at and hearing, any special hearings that are going on that you find out in the news. We recommend being proactive, becoming familiar with your legislature, developing relationships in the interim with the committees, the committee staff, and the committee members so that they know that you're a resource. So they're, you know, we've got an opioid issue. We're going to hold a series of hearings. Let's reach out to so-and-so at the university. We know they're doing work on this, and they can really inform our presentation and our deliberations.
Yeah, and this is Megan. I'll kind of add to that. I think that a couple things about just general legislative structure is committee structure. So knowing the committee structure in the state, knowing what the jurisdiction of those committees is. So there would be a foster care, a committee that would handle foster care, probably the Human Services Committee. There are some specialized committees depending on the state. If it's about education and foster care, you might also need to reach out to the Education Committee. Knowing the chairs of those committees can be very important. They sometimes have staff that can help disseminate your information to the whole committee. So maybe developing relationships with the chairs of the relevant committees that you're doing research on would be helpful. And then some legislatures, some of the bigger ones, have a legislative council or a nonpartisan research staff. And that staff may be broken up by topic. So you might be able to find out specific staff on the topic that you're working on that you could reach out to. Certainly reaching out generally and finding out who the best person to talk to is an option. But it kind of goes back to the knowing your legislature and knowing when they meet and how they're structured. And so those are kind of the basics.
Mm-hmm. And I would also add back into that too, remember that you may have a legislator serving on a Human Services Committee for a number of years, then they may, which they're assigned to by leadership, then they may go off and be on another committee, but they still may be a champion on a specific issue. They would certainly, you know, vote on the issue. So keep track of who those legislators are and where they're going. And remember that they all serve on a number of committees, not just the Human Services Committee. They may be on a bunch of other committees, depending on, you know, how it's set up in your state.
And this is Julie. I guess my comments based on more of, so once you meet with these folks, make sure that how you communicate the information is very concise, and it's a, you know, if you could have talking points, maybe bullets of what your research looks like and what you found and how it might actually impact policy would help.
Right. And I think Megan said earlier, they're not necessarily interested, not that they're not interested, but may not be as engaged in the discussion about methodology as they are about sort of what the end results are. So focus on that first.
Yeah.
Will be of help.
It looks like we have another question. Do you have any example of a one-pager or policy brief on your website that policymakers would be receptive to getting information through and about health policy issues? Yes, we do. We do a lot of policy briefs, and we're still learning the one-pager being short and concise, just like everyone else, but we try. I think one of the bigger pieces we do are legis briefs. They're a one-page front and back. They cover federal and state policy. And we can kind of share some examples about that. But we have it, on all topics. We'll have some examples of some one-page policy briefs, or ways of communicating best that we could share. Maybe we could share with Leanne. I don't know, Leanne, how you we can share it with you and you can share it with everybody, or.
Yeah, definitely. We can send that to everybody, the links, and maybe even, an example or two. I wanted to follow up one thing, and then Sarah actually has another question for you. When you were talking about getting all this, figuring out, how your legislature works and who's on all the committees and all that sort of stuff, is that information that usually is found at a state level, like on a state government website, or is that something you all track, or what's the best way of getting that information in the first place?
Yeah, so every state legislature has a website for the state legislature. So all their legislation is public, and their contact information in most cases. So that's the best resource to go to, is the state that you're working in or you're interested in targeting. Go to their state legislature webpage, and you should be able to see all the committees, who chairs those committees and the other members, what legislation those committees are handling. So you can kind of see if it falls within your area, and there should be some contact information there as well. That's probably your best resource.
Yeah, and they all have really great most of them have a how a bill becomes a law piece on their website that's often graphic. That would be really, really helpful to see how the legislation travels through and provide other important information on how your particular legislature works.
Yeah, and I think Julie just reminded me, I think we have on ncsl.org a website with links to every state legislature website. So I can share that as well in the follow-up to this.
Great, thank you.
I just shared with the NCSL, I just shared with you a few other questions that we have from fellows. If you want to look at those. And then I had a question about your fellowship program. And some of this might be on the website that you share, but I was wondering if on that website it shows who all the members of each cohort are, and does it show what their sort of areas of interest are, or things that they're currently working on in their roles? I was sort of thinking that maybe if it did, that our fellows that might reach out to your fellows as like a first line of contact of like, if they notice that somebody in their state is interested in a similar issue that they're interested in, would you think that your fellows would be open to, receiving email communication from our fellows about like, hey, we're working on the same thing. You're the policymaker, I'm the researcher. There might be an opportunity for collaboration there.
Yeah, so on our fellows website, there is a bio information document, and it lists out the fellows and what committees are on. It doesn't necessarily show the interests that they have, but there's their committees that they either chair or a member of are listed there. In terms of connecting with them, I'd be more than happy to be that conduit. I think this is definitely an area of possible engagement, and it makes sense in terms of just connecting that research to policy. So I don't know if this is something we can talk offline about, Leanne. But I'd be more than happy to just brainstorm and see where we can go with this.
Absolutely, that's a great idea. Thanks, Sarah, for thinking of that. Yeah, for sure.
I think we missed one question up above about how to get our newsletters. So email us. There's a website where you can just sort of sign up, but it's probably best to just email us, and So you can email me, Megan, Julie, or Nina, but if you want to email me, I'm happy to get you to the right person and get you signed up for whichever newsletter you'd like to get signed up for.
Yep.
And then we also, so each newsletter, we send it out to our network, to our listserv of emails, but then we also post it on our website. So we have archives for usually about a year, and then we'll sort of rotate out each year. So we have a year's worth of newsletters that we post on our website as well. So you can see sort of what we've done and what those look like there, and we can share links to some of those so you can see it too with Leanne afterwards. We can send you a one-pager of bullet points and information like a legislator would find helpful.
Right.
And so you can see that.
Great idea.
So the other question was, any ideas for teaching our students that we teach how to engage in advocacy efforts at the state level? Anybody wanna feel that? I guess one thing we didn't mention before, but one thing to keep in mind are the hearings, the committee hearings that happen in state legislatures are open to the public.
Yeah, they're open.
So you are more than welcome to go sit in, and that's another opportunity to engage the legislatures before or after that meeting. The legislative buildings are open, so you can see them in session. It is a public process that you have full access to. So I'd encourage you to go listen in, and it might even be helpful just to go listen to a hearing or the session just to understand kind of how they're using information as well. But any other ideas about how to teach advocacy efforts?
Well, this is Nina. Well, some ideas that we have include you could bring in a legislator to talk to your group of students, which I'm sure would be eye-opening both for the legislator and for the students, and be really engaging. I mean, I've sort of been involved peripherally in efforts that include foster youth, becoming proactive and getting them more engaged to meet their legislators. And I will tell you, legislators working with constituents, with students, with youth, they're really, really very interested in and really perk up and really listen and connect with them. And I think, again, developing that kind of a relationship and with legislators or a legislator and trying to come in and sit down and have a meeting so that you make a contact with someone there, and then think about how to do that on a regular basis that makes sense given the legislator schedules, your student schedules, so that they can meet and discuss some of these issues on a regular basis. But I know that they, if it's advocacy, I'm most familiar with youth in foster care or transitioning out of foster care, and them telling them their stories really, helps legislators to make better policy, and having them look at policy from their point of view as to what things need to happen or what the barriers or challenges are related to a particular piece of policy. That seems to work well. And I don't quite know how that would work with students that are research students engaging in advocacy efforts, but that's sort of the beginning of something. But sit down and craft a plan to contact them on a regular basis is a start.
We have another question about, you are a nonpartisan organization or bipartisan organization. Do you have any tips on how to connect with legislators that might be across the aisle from the researcher's own political and social views?
I mean, for me, especially working at NCSL and working in a nonpartisan group, they're people too. They're interested in information too. So even if they're not perfectly aligned with what it is that you're trying to disseminate, I think sharing the information and the what did you learn and how you learned it and why it's important to what they're doing, they're going to be receptive to it. They're, legislators are people too.
Yeah.
And so they like to talk to other people and meet new people. And I know it seems very contentious, but particularly in state legislatures, I think there is a lot of opportunity to bypass some of that and just share information. But I don't know if anyone else.
And I think too, in framing it more of you're providing facts, figures, research information, which is not necessarily partisan. So, you know, couching in that sense, you can certainly have a dialogue of sorts. So that's what I would recommend.
Right. I mean, it's been my experience that legislators have never been, you know, in any way disrespectful or make anyone feel uncomfortable when presenting information that, you know, they may or may not agree with. And also, I think, you know, you have to think in terms of legislators are crafting policy in this area. They do control the purse strings. So, you know, you do have to think that they're normal people. They take that responsibility very seriously in the topic that I cover anyway, and really do want to hear everything that they can so that they can make a most informed, you know, the most informed decision. And if you come in with that kind of an attitude, I think that really helps forward the conversation.
Great, thank you. We got one more question that I'm just going to ask it instead of typing it in. This was, do you ever have legislators ask you, you know, you know, do you ever get calls from somebody saying, oh, we're talking about this issue, do you know anybody I can talk to about that? Like a research person or someone who's been involved in a particular area of a particular issue for a long time. Does that ever, I assume that happens a lot to you all, and do you think, is there any, how, if a fellow is in a state and is interested in sort of being available to state legislators who are interested in a particular topic, is that something they would just reach out to a legislator directly, or is that something where they would reach out to one of you all and say, hey, this is my issue and I'd love to get involved at a state level, and, you know, who should I talk to? Or yeah, how could you see that working?
So this is Julie. We do have legislators that ask us, I would have to say on a very consistent basis, you know, what is the research, who are the researchers, who's doing this type of work. Just to preface this is when legislators ask us for information, it's confidential, it's an information request. We provide them with the information that we know of the researchers that, you know, are out there. So I think my suggestion here is just maybe this is more of a communicating who your fellows are and just getting on the same page of, you know, what research you all are looking at, and just making sure that we're aware of it so that we're able to give it to, you know, our audience, our constituents.
Yeah, I mean, I think we get asked that question a lot, but we don't get asked that question every single time a legislator is looking for a researcher. So I think you doing some of the specific state outreach and making those relationships is important as well, and letting them know that you're available with the information. And we'll certainly, if we know about it, we'll share it.
Sure. Great. Well, thank you so much. I think we don't have any more questions that I see right now. So I think we'll go ahead and bring this to a close. Thank you again, Julie and Nina and Megan, for the time that you took in creating this presentation and meeting with our fellows. To the fellows, we will follow up with you all in an email with a bunch of information that we'll get from NCSL, and send that out to you all with the slides, like we always do. Yeah, and if you have any questions, let us know afterwards, and we'll put you in touch with somebody. So, so thanks very much, everybody. We appreciate it, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Great. Bye-bye. Thank you.